Ahoy hoy! This is series 4 of Bullock's Rules for Writing. This series is on analysis, which means I'll be spending a lot of time talking about the only rule you really need to know. That is, of course, writers write what they write on purpose. It was the subject of episode 0 of this web series. If you haven't watched episode 0, it will be the first link down below in the description. I encourage you to check it out before watching the rest of this episode or the rest of this series. Otherwise, here's the theme song. Hey everybody, analysis and my 2 rules for analysis. I'm going to talk about what those 2 rules are in just a second, but first I want to say I will be mentioning a couple of poems and pointing out examples from the poems as I explain how these 2 rules work. The poems are Harlem by Langston Hughes and Hope is a Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. I'm putting a link in the description below to those poems at the Poetry Foundation. But I'm also going to display them for about 5 seconds, which is not enough time for you to read them. So please, when you see the poems, hit pause, read them, and I will see you on the other side. All right, let's just dive right into it. Rule number 1, no Waldos. You probably recognize Waldo. If you don't recognize him, I'll put a link in the description below, but he stars in a series of books called Where's Waldo? What happens is that you open to any particular 2-page spread in a book, and hidden somewhere among all of these other people and things and distracting lines and colors is Waldo. And when you find him, you win. It's a puzzle, it's a game where just spotting Waldo is victory. There are a lot of students, and I've taught a lot of students over the years, and I don't know exactly where this idea comes from, but there are a lot of students who think that literature, especially poetry, is some kind of Where's Waldo puzzle. That, you know, the author was trying to hide the meaning, and all students have to do to complete a successful analysis, they think, is spot a technique or 2. First of all, authors don't make their works hard to understand on purpose. There are some texts that are hard to understand, maybe because they were written 400 years ago, like Shakespeare, or maybe because an author is relating such an incredibly personal experience that it's hard for somebody to really get what was going on in the author's heads. But for the most part, writers, when they write, they have something here in their brains that they're trying to get to you through your eye holes. And if they made it into a puzzle, the odds that they would fail at getting their point across increased dramatically. So for the most part, writers are not trying to trick you. They're not trying to hide anything. And the second thing that's wrong with approaching literature as a game where you just have to spot a technique is that merely spotting the technique is not enough to demonstrate that you understand what the author was trying to do with a text. So the no Waldos rule means that you have to talk about the effects of a technique. What purposes were achieved when the author used that technique. For example, there is a simile right at the beginning and throughout Harlem. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? The whole point of Hope is a Thing with Feathers is that hope is turned into this metaphor for a bird. It's not enough to say, oh, simile, like, it's got the word like, it's a simile. It's not enough to say, oh, it's a metaphor. Hope isn't really a bird. A hope is an intangible thing. So there, a metaphor. You can't just say that and walk away. You have to talk about what that author accomplishes and achieves with that technique. And that's rule number 1, no Waldos. Okay, rule number 2. I call it the Ebert Rule. This guy was not a fictional character hidden in the pages of a book. He was a very real and very good film critic. His name is Roger Ebert, and he once wrote about a film. He said a film is not about what it's about how it's about it. Now I've kind of taken that idea and I've extended it to apply to any text. A text is not about what it's about how it's about it. Now, that might be kind of confusing, and I fully understand. But let's think about what that might mean in the context of movies. I mean, he was a film critic. So if I were to ask you for a one-sentence summary of, I don't know, The Avengers, you might say something like, individuals come together to overcome a powerful enemy, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not using the details of Captain America and Iron Man and Thor and Nick Fury and Scarlett Johansson. No, I'm just sort of narrowing it down to its bare bones. Individuals come together to overcome a powerful enemy. Well, that could apply to a lot of movies, couldn't it? I mean, the Justice League, right? Individuals coming together to overcome a powerful enemy. What about, what was that other one? A Suicide Squad, right? Those were generally bad guys, but they came together to overcome a powerful enemy. Guardians of the Galaxy, pretty much any comic book movie that you can name. Individuals come together to overcome a powerful enemy. But it's also true of movies that aren't comic book movies. I mean, there are a lot of action movies like Fast and the Furious, or the movies that straddle that line between action and comic books, like Ghostbusters or the other Ghostbusters. Individuals come together to overcome a powerful enemy. All right, and now you're probably thinking like, okay, what about movies that aren't related to action or comic books? Well, I mean, you've still got those movies. Think of the recent movie Hidden Figures, right? Individuals coming together to overcome a great enemy. Now that enemy may have been racism and sexism, but it was still an enemy. And just off the top of my head, I can name a bunch of other movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Drumline, All the President's Men, Police Academy 1, that one about the newspapers, Apollo 13, The Breakfast Club. No, seriously, it was like the newspaper that broke the Catholic Church scandal. Police Academy 2, Elf, Argo, American Hustle, The Goonies, Star Wars. The newspaper went, oh, Spotlight, Shrek, like all of the Harry Potters, Toy Story, Smokey and the Bandit, Police Academy 3. Okay, all of those movies are obviously very, very different movies, but you can still kind of fairly sum them up by saying individuals are coming together to overcome a powerful enemy. Now, obviously, the guy who wrote Guardians of the Galaxy and the guy who wrote All the President's Men are telling very different stories. They are making very different choices. Remember, writers write what they write on purpose. And the writers, as well as the directors and the producers and the actors and other people involved in the production of a film, they made choices about what story they would tell and how they would tell it. So, yeah, all of those movies are about the same thing, but the how of each one of those movies is different. If you think about our two poems, Harlem and Hope is a Thing with Feathers, Harlem is very clearly about dreams that are being squished and repressed. Hope is the Thing with Feathers is also about dreams and hopes and desires, but it goes in a very, very different direction. For Langston Hughes, that stifling of hope is dangerous. For Emily Dickinson, that presence of hope is uplifting and amazing. Obviously, those two poets are trying to say something different about hope and its absence or its presence, but they are both kind of writing about the same thing. And when Langston Hughes talks about how a dream deferred might explode, the most violent reaction you could possibly imagine to a stifled dream, he's looking at hope very differently than Emily Dickinson, who says that in the end, hope has never asked anything from her. Hope is just a giver. Dreams are just good. So to sum up, these two rules, the Waldo Rule and the Ebert Rule. Knowing what techniques are used in a text is fantastic, but it's not the end. You need to talk about those effects. When Langston Hughes uses these similes of danger and disgust, how does that make us feel as readers? What is the effect of that choice on us? And you've also got to get into what makes every text unique. It's good that you can say what a text is about, but analysis is really how. So Emily Dickinson's extended metaphor of a bird for hope is very, very different than the way Langston Hughes talks about the hopes and dreams that have been deferred. You've really got to understand those two concepts, because if you are just spotting Waldo, or if you don't care how a text is different from some other text, then you're not going to be successful at analysis. And these next few episodes are not going to make much sense to you. In the next episode, I will get a little bit more in depth into what analysis actually means. And we're going to talk about the concept of close reading, which is a skill that you really need to have if you're going to do a successful analysis. But these two things, the No Waldo's Rule, the Ebert Rule, those are the foundation of what makes a successful analysis successful. All right? I'll see you for the next one. I don't know if you can hear the cat outside the door there, but he thinks it's his dinner time. It's like 2 in the afternoon. I don't understand.